Everyone, welcome to Syniega TV with me, Rich Gibbons, and today I'm being joined by the excellent David Shields, who is CEO of Value Match. So thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, if you'd just like to let everyone know a little bit about you, sort of who you are, who Value Match are, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having us on Syniega TV. Fantastic. Yeah, my background is mostly commercial and procurement. I've managed what is now Crown Commercial Services. I've worked in government, financial services, and I've had my own company since 2013. And we do a lot of support around procurement, commercial, and sustainability, both in the public and private sectors. So that's a little bit of my background.
Oh, well, that keeps you busy then. So I'm sure, yeah, looking after CCS, what is now CCS, that must have been, probably one or two orders went through that department.
It was, it was a really interesting time because it was around the time of the coalition government as well. So that had been a big change constitutionally. We had really good support at that point, political support as well from the government to help make quite a lot of changes. I think we had the first ever chief commercial officer in government at that point. So there was a lot of changes, and we did quite a lot of interesting work around software in particular, around Oracle, Microsoft, and those sorts of big players for UK government.
Oh, yeah, that definitely would have kept you busy then. So I guess that probably ties in quite nicely with the sort of topic. So what I wanted to talk to you about was, independence. So when it comes to buying software, and working with partners, there's people that you can buy software from. There's people that can optimize your software, manage your software. And really, it's a bit of a hot topic. Just trying to find out more your thoughts on, the importance or lack thereof, perhaps, of independence when it comes to partners that you use to buy and manage software.
As you know, you guys are experts. Maximizing the use of softwares, I think it takes a combination of different skills. You've got fundamental commercial, legal skills around the contracts, the value, the whole life cost of a product, how you get the best out of those applications, and the vendors as well who are providing those applications. There's also working really closely with the IT and the people using the products in the front line often. So you need a combination of those skills. And because of the complexity, I think, with most applications and the way they're developing, having independent expertise, I can come in and just validate what your approach, what are you doing, what are best practices, who are neutral. And I think the neutrality is probably a word I'd use more than independence, actually. The neutrality of someone giving you that advice, I think, is really important, and certainly has been helpful for me in the past, where we think we're doing the right things, we think we're optimizing a solution, but we really want to validate and check that, and have someone who's living and breathing the challenges and issues across maybe multiple sectors as well. So it's the breadth of expertise as well as the sort of independence. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I really like the word neutrality. Actually, I'm probably going to steal that off you now. To be fair,
I won't charge you for
that. Thank you very much. I'll send a contract over later. But yeah, because I think that does sum it up really nicely. Actually, neutrality. They're not driven either way. So the way that we look at it, and other independent and neutral partners, is whatever's best for you as the customer. And then that tends to be where the conversation picks up. That lots of people, obviously there's lots of resellers that they sell software. They also do asset management services, and there's multiple sides to the kind of conversation. But that feeling that you know, are as an end user, can you be sure that they are totally neutral? And I think, you know, that's for everyone to decide, I think, in their own situation. But from your perspective, you know, is it something that customers should consider, and are there things they can do to try and, you know, look for it?
It's a really interesting question, because I think there's lots of great resellers out there who do super professional work. They know the client base really well, and they know the application providers really well. And I don't. I think it's people, isn't it? So right, you get great people, and they provide really great advice, and sometimes maybe you get people who've got different incentives. I think most people will know that all of the resellers will have some sort of commercial relationships with application providers, and that's perfectly legitimate. There's no issue, and most informed organizations should be aware of that. They're not going to disclose those commercial relationships particularly, but there is always going to be an element of incentivization over what intermediaries do. And it's not just an IT reseller issue, by the way. This is where all intermediaries in all markets who have commercial incentives. So there's no issue with that, but I think there is an opportunity to validate and test the advice you're getting. I think some proportionality over, the size and scale of contracts, the importance of those applications to you as an organization. But I think validating any advice that you're receiving, having a health check, really looking at the roadmap of the core applications that you're working with, all those sorts of issues. I think certainly for major spend areas and core applications that are core to your organization, I think having that independent, neutral view is absolutely critical. And I think ultimately, even if it does nothing more than give you the assurance that you're doing the right things, that in itself has quite significant value. And in my experience in general, there'll always be a couple of things you could do differently, things you could improve, maybe questions you can ask, whether it's the application provider or if you're obtaining that through the reseller. Being informed is a good idea, full stop. So it seems to me a bit of a no-brainer, especially if you've got, I say, quite significant expenditure, a lot of users in core applications.
I really like that. I think, the concept of being informed is super important, and using the kind of neutral partners to verify and fact check makes a lot of sense. And I guess when it comes to like big contracts, and I suppose it applies to public sector, but also private sector with stakeholders and things, if you're spending 150 million on some software or something, there's probably going to be some point where someone says, are you sure that was the best way of doing it? Have you done your due diligence in spending our money effectively, etc.? So I guess using that kind of independent partner would answer those questions, where you can say, we've had it verified effectively by a third party that this is the best option.
I think there's 2 or 3 different aspects to that. I don't think it matters really whether it's public or private, because if you're spending that amount of money on a core application, say an ERP system, for example, it's so important for the business, and you're going to really have that application for 10 years or more, even if it's cloud-based, because of the operational impact of changing those types of systems. You need a blended set of skills, including, I think, expertise from outside the organization, because even if you've got really highly qualified, competent people, they only know what their direct experience is. Whereas if you've implemented, or if you've been part of projects that have reviewed, implemented applications over many sorts of different customers over different parts of the world, you're going to have a different perspective over the strengths and weaknesses of applications and how they're being implemented, the pros and cons of different applications, the pros and cons of different ways of implementing the existing a single application, because there isn't one way of tackling any of those situations. So because of the strategic nature of those types of projects, I think it's wholly appropriate, and I would argue that it's probably a bit foolhardy not to take some independent advice over not just the commercials, but the approach and who's on the implementation team from the application provider. And certainly in the big projects I've been involved in, where you may have an IT services company who's part of the implementation of that process, they also have commercial relationships with a lot of the application providers. So, it's hard to say that they're neutral in the true sense of the word. They obviously want to make implementations work and work effectively. So I think, again, it's just being aware of those commercial relationships that exist between the major application providers, the IT consultancies, the IT service delivery companies, and the resellers. So I think there's a number of practical reasons, I think, to seek that level of independent, neutral advice and best practice.
I completely agree. I really like that, and I think, it's different. It's almost on a case-by-case basis. There'll be some cases where you think, well, do you know what? It's pretty straightforward. We'll just go with this. Others where you go through that kind of process, and I guess back to what you said earlier about being informed. For each customer, I suppose if as long as they're aware of these things, potential risks, and they've got a process for managing it, whatever that might be, then at least in the future you can turn around and say, look, or we did X and Y, or we didn't do it because of A and B, and at least it's all kind of documented.
Well, I think also you need to be very clear on what is important for you as an organization. So in the sense of what's the strategy for these core systems, so what levels of flexibility. So depending on the software vendor, you can have quite restrictive terms and conditions, and certainly I've worked in the past for organizations who acquire and divest on a regular basis and have quite a complex corporate structure. So the assignment clauses and the ability to shift and change numbers of software licenses between one legal entity and another is super important, and it's actually core part of the business of that organization. So for those, the ability to assign, move licenses, bring in new organizations, remove other organizations was strategically really important. So you need to start with, what are we trying to obtain, not just in terms of the use of the product, but the flexibility in the use of the product from a business perspective, and then build those into the contracts up front. Now, with your level of expertise, that some vendors are more or less flexible over certain aspects of their contracts. And you already know where they're likely to be more flexible and where there's likely to be sticking issues. So I think sometimes being forewarned of that, certainly if you're right at the beginning of the process and say you've got choices over, do I choose product A, B, or C? If product A and the vendor is going to be more flexible in terms of enabling you to move licenses around, etc., rather than B and C, then it shouldn't just be, the sort of application usage or the cost. The flexibility should be built into the process to make those assessments. So I think it's being forewarned of those type of things as well, and sort of planning that right up front. What you don't want to be doing is, we've now signed a contract and all of a sudden we now need to make these changes, and that's a different type of challenge and conversation. So I think it's that level of expertise where you're at the beginning of those contracting cycles, and as an independent expert, you've done it 100 times, 1,000 times. most organizations may only do it once or twice in a 10 or 15 year cycle. You cannot know all of that stuff. So it's that sort of type of information that I think makes a really big difference. Certainly in the big projects I've been involved in right up front.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That even the most experienced, professionals with careers, they started doing it when they were 5 years old. They're still only going to have seen a handful. But if you talk to a partner, with dozens of people across different areas, they'll have seen maybe 100, 150 contracts, and you've seen 2. There's going to be value in that. Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And for organizations, because as much as we start, we're talking about the kind of the independence of partners. For some organizations, the question is do they use partners at all? Some people prefer to try and do it all in-house, and I think that point around the wealth of expertise that's available in a partner, it is a fantastic reason to look at it.
Well, it doesn't need to be a huge expense, right? So again, if we are talking about tens of millions of pounds, hundreds of millions of pounds of projects, taking some specialist advice is not disproportionate to the value of the contract. And actually, if you do it at the right time, and for me, the right time is as early as possible in the project, and probably at very specific points through that project life cycle. So, when you're setting your strategy, really get understanding the market from a number of different perspectives. That seems to me a really critical point, because you can avoid making mistakes, or maybe opening up to a level of competition which enables you to target different types of vendors for whatever reason, based on that sort of level of insight. Really baselining your as-is position, and then through the life cycle of any project, then using that expertise where it's needed. So I'm quite a big believer of in-house teams owning and delivering, and not being over reliant on third parties in general. There's a balance here, but I think it's really important that that level of ownership and expertise is built in-house, where the organization has the size and capacity to do that. However, you still want to be informed, educated, and knowledgeable, and then just doing that in a very purposeful way. And I think using specialists, I think in many ways is far better than maybe the more generalist sort of consultancy type companies. Not that they don't have expertise, but it's not, it's one strand to their organization, as opposed to it's everything that they do. They live and breathe it. That's what they do every day. So that's just my preference, but it's also based on the experiences I've had in dealing with, many, many different other big consultancies and service providers.
Awesome. Well, I mean, certainly at Syniego, we like the sound of that for sure. Cool. So, I mean, I think we could probably talk about this for hours, but I think we've covered quite a lot there. And I think, you've given everyone some great food for thought. So I think with that, I will say thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Bye.